Hey, this is Chuck Rowe from Midwest Studies Group. Thanks for joining us again for another webinar. Today, we're going to talk about how the world of volunteering has changed during COVID. I'm going to ask everyone to go around the room and just introduce yourselves.
Lauren Finke, and I'm the director of the Volunteer Center of Cedar Valley.
I am Niki Litzel, and I have some previous volunteer experience. I am not currently in a volunteer management role, but I feel appreciated to be asked to be a part of this.
James Lee, I'm the Chief Executive Officer for the Boys and Girls Club of the Cedar Valley.
So when talking about volunteers today, I thought, how could I put together the best panel discussion possible? And what better panel could we find than the three of you? So thanks so much for being part of this today. Now, all three of you have worked with volunteers in the past. What emotions went through your mind when you found out COVID pretty much shut down everything, and now you're losing out on the opportunity to work with volunteers?
Well, I think surprisingly at the Volunteer Center, obviously we had those feelings of, oh, there's a lot of organizations in our community who engage volunteers regularly. But the surprising thing is that suddenly we had a small but mighty group of organizations that were desperately seeking volunteers to help support some of just the essential things that were happening in our community. And so, while it's not ideal to focus in on just a few organizations for the long term, I mean, we work with almost 200 organizations in the community, but we really took those few organizations and did our part to help promote and support the things that were needed to help fill those gaps. And we, surprisingly had hundreds of people over the course of about a 2-month time span really reach out and want to give back. And so while things look differently, I think the Cedar Valley continued to shine with their willingness to participate in service experiences and their want and need and desire to give back to our community. So it was a welcome surprise.
I would jump in and say that not long after the pandemic hit, I was getting some phone calls from some people who wanted to help and weren't sure how to help or who they should reach out to first. It just seemed like, what can I do? And it was interesting to, just be able to share all the different, and I actually referred them to the Volunteer Center because there are so many great opportunities. And, whether you want to help remotely because you're not comfortable being in person with, other people, I saw opportunities like that arise. Obviously, making masks and different PPE equipment and just other ways to help, whether you could help again remotely or in person. It was really neat to see how people really wanted to come forward and be a part of that.
I think from a club perspective, for us, it was really, it changed us because before we had, tons of volunteers coming through our doors. And then for us, it was like, whoa, we don't want tons of volunteers to come through our doors so that we can keep our staff and our youth and the community in general safe. So we had to kind of reevaluate how we partner and allow volunteers to be able to still volunteer with the club, but just do it a little bit differently. So we experienced a really great and welcoming community that was eager to try and do something and support the club. However, we just had to look at it a little bit differently to see how that would take place.
So Niki, you kind of touched upon this where maybe some of your volunteers that were doing other things were now instead making masks. So you kind of touched about this a little bit, but James and Lauren, what are some other examples that you've seen where volunteering has changed now, where you had to do things a little bit different with your volunteers?
Well, I think Niki mentioned the term kind of remote volunteering, having people get involved virtually on a lot of different things. And, the Volunteer Center kind of took that conversation with some of our community partners and really helped them, figure out where they could engage people into the work that they're doing. Because maybe now they couldn't come in, for example, at the Boys and Girls Club and help alongside the youth or partner with the youth. But maybe the Boys and Girls Club needed help with something that could be done outside of the sites that they're at. So maybe it was something with marketing or graphic design, web development, but even more so, it doesn't have to utilize technology to have remote volunteering or virtual volunteering. It could really be helping with something off-site that is just needed to be done. Maybe blankets need to be made for the homeless shelter. Maybe packs are needing to, hygiene packs are needing to be created for the Salvation Army. I mean, the list goes on and on and on that you can come up with ways that people can give back without actually being on site at organizations.
Now, most towns in the Midwest, I mean, you come across the Chicagos and the Des Moines and things like that, and St. Louis, but most towns in the Midwest are kind of on the smaller end of things. And when you walk around town, you see the people that really you saw maybe at church, and then you saw them at school, and then you saw them at work. I mean, you see the same people around all the time. So when you haven't seen a volunteer in a good month or two because of COVID, and then now you bump into them at Target or a store or something like that, what are some of the comments that they're saying to you when they see you randomly throughout the streets?
For the club, we hear a lot from volunteers saying, I'm ready to get back in there and volunteer. I'm ready to run that program. When can we come back in? Which is great that they are still engaged and want to be engaged with volunteering at the club. But a lot of that is they're really eager to get back in and pick up where they left off pre-COVID.
I think it's similar to what we're seeing with the Volunteer Center's RSVP program. I mean, those individuals are age 55 and older, and they're used to doing Reading Buddies programs in the Waterloo schools or the tax program, which obviously got shut down kind of right in the middle of it. And so they're very eager to get back. And we've come up with different ways that they can get involved. I mean, for example, we're working with the Waterloo schools now where we won't be having Reading Buddies come into the school, but we're figuring out to use technology, Zoom, to have reading partnerships happening between the adult RSVP volunteer and the youth in the classroom. So while the volunteering doesn't look exactly the same as it did, 6, 7, 8 months ago, we are trying to come up with unique ways that these volunteers who want to give, they want to be a part, ways for them to stay connected to the opportunities. And I would say that a lot of them are being very flexible and have that willingness to kind of take on that change of what it might look like. So it's been kind of exciting in a way to see what might happen.
Well, and you bring up an excellent point to that, because I think there's a lot of people that, like my mother, she reads the kids at school and she misses it to death. So hopefully they do get back. So anyway, sorry, Niki, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think the key word through all of this has been pivot. Everybody's had to pivot and adapt and be flexible and be graceful and find other ways, and creative. You have to be creative with ways to help out. So yeah. And so one of the things that people have been having to pivot on is what kind of things could they do at their agency in order to make things safer for volunteers. Do any of you have any suggestions or tips for nonprofits out there that need to make their place maybe a little bit safer, a little bit cleaner, in order to make volunteers feel more welcome and safer when they go to their place?
We've really been promoting the term safe and socially distanced on sites at different organizations and following the CDC guidelines. So as we promote volunteer opportunities in our community, we're driving kind of that same message about, if you don't feel well, please don't come. Do that checklist. Do I feel well? Do I have a fever? Do I have any new symptoms? Prior to showing up on site someplace if you're going to be volunteering in person. But we've been really relying heavily on what the CDC says as it being acceptable to be in public. And then Volunteer Iowa has really been helping promote some safe and best practices related to volunteer engagement in the state of Iowa. And so we've been sharing that out as well. and kind of making sure that it's a part of all of our messaging that's going out. I mean, I do think there's some fatigue. We've all heard this, like, wear your mask, wash your hands, we keep hearing this over and over again. But it is definitely something that's important, and we need to keep our organizations safe because so many of them are working with vulnerable populations, and that is really key to the success of our community, that volunteers are able to provide their time. So it just needs to be a safe way of work.
Anyone else? It's okay. I don't want to move on if someone has a word.
Well, and I think, we've pretty much done the same thing. Make sure you wear a mask. Unless you're in a room like this by yourself, then, this is kind of your workspace. We've also encouraged, the constant hand washing. I think CDC guidelines says 45 minutes. We've actually increased that to 30 minutes, just so that both our kids and our staff and even our volunteers get an opportunity to use actual soap instead of hand sanitizer. So we've just tried to add some additional hand sanitizer stations and hand washing opportunities throughout our day, so that way it kind of keeps us healthier and safer.
The thing that kind of cracks me up a little bit, not that the situation is funny, but what cracks me up just a tiny bit is a lot of things that we're doing these days, it seems like they're things that you should be doing anyway. So you go to a restaurant and you may see a card that says this table has been washed, or you go to a school or something or a Boys and Girls Club and they'll say, well, the kids are washing their hands, and it's like, well, this is all stuff that should have been done in the first place, right? So I would just find it a little interesting. But now when it comes back to normal, hopefully one of these days, the people that haven't noticed the difference are the ones that don't use volunteers. It's the people that use volunteers that are like, oh my gosh, where are they gone? And how do we get them back? And how do we make them feel safe? The ones that don't have volunteers are the ones that don't miss anything at all. So let me ask you guys, since you all have experience with this, what are organizations missing out on by not having volunteers?
I'm going to jump in because I actually have experienced, and I've seen with a couple of different organizations that haven't really used volunteers in the past, but now have a need for them along the lines of keeping everyone safe and clean. So there are some organizations I've witnessed that are asking for people to come in and do some extra cleaning and sanitizing and things like that on a voluntary basis to help. And then also screening people as they're coming in and checking temperatures and asking those questions of, if they've had a fever, if they've been exposed. So I guess kind of on the flip side, I've seen an opportunity for people, again, who feel comfortable with doing those things of cleaning and screening. There are some volunteer opportunities at organizations that actually haven't had volunteers, a large portion of volunteers in the past that I've seen.
And organizations that aren't engaging volunteers, or even one would say aren't engaging volunteers effectively, are not able to attack their missions and make the work that they're happening, or not use their best practices to attack their missions. I mean, I think that the engaging volunteers is really the utilization of human capital. We as people giving of our time to another organization, the impact that provides is so important. And so I would hope that organizations that don't see the engagement of volunteers as not a best practice for them is something that they will reconsider, because we want to see those organizations succeed and go to scale and be able to accomplish the things that they want to accomplish. And why wouldn't you want to engage people who want to be a part of your organization to get to do that mission-driven work?
And Lauren, I know the number changes every year and it probably goes up, I would assume, but there's a value per hour cost that a volunteer is worth.
Yeah.
Per hour, right?
And you said you were not going to throw any
curveballs
at us for numbers, but it's like $27 or something like that an hour is the national average. But that information, I mean, it's a quick Google search. I think Independent Sector puts that out every year. But yeah, I mean, there is that economic impact for every dollar that a volunteer gives of their time. I mean, there is a dollar figure that goes back to that organization. And I mean, you know, when you're engaging volunteers, obviously it's not all about cost saving, because that's really what it shouldn't be about. I mean, you don't necessarily want to take away employment opportunity for somebody by engaging a volunteer, but really you should look at it as being like that next level or that next step for an organization to do even more in the community. But yeah, that dollar figure definitely does help when you can show that return on your volunteer investment as an organization, and then show that economic impact that volunteers have too.
Well, James, and something at your place that you probably noticed is that the trend for donors these days is that the younger donors tend to want to be a little bit more involved in the organization that they donate to. Have you noticed that yourself then?
Oh, absolutely. But it's actually a good experience for both the younger donor or the donor, as well as for the kids that we serve, because they get someone that is closer age that they are able to make a connection with, and feel like, hey, this is my buddy, this is my friend. So it's really a great partnership to have the donor actually come in and see where their money is actually being spent, and what impact that does by coming inside of the club and seeing and interacting with our kids. So it's actually a great win-win for the donor to actually experience that volunteerism through with their donation.
That's awesome. And Lauren, I know I'm asking you all the tough questions, but here we go. Is that if there's a nonprofit out there that are throughout the United States, really, so it doesn't have to be where we live here, but anywhere, is there a national website or something that an organization can go to learn how to start a volunteer program at their organization?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of different national resources. The Volunteer Center of Cedar Valley, amongst a lot of other volunteer centers across the United States, oftentimes turn to Points of Light. And so we're affiliates of their organization, and they do a lot of mission-driven volunteer engagement efforts. But, a lot of the work that they do funnels down to either statewide commissions. So we have the Volunteer Iowa office based out of the state of Iowa. And then locally, there's a lot of different volunteer centers here. So we're lucky across the state of Iowa to have numerous volunteer centers. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different opportunities. And, as always, I'm always willing to help point people, even if it's in other states, for different state associations and things.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for offering that. And, one of the things that I want to point out here is that not only are you guys giving great advice, great tips that I think everyone's going to run with, but this is also just to have a time for when people watch this that they know, oh, good, I'm not alone by myself by being sad, frustrated, annoyed, you name the negative word, by not having the volunteers that I'm used to having, or, this whole COVID ordeal has really thrown a monkey wrench in their whole life. And so it's good to know that there's other people that have experienced it. It's not just them on an island. So thank you so much. Now, before I let you go, does anyone else have any words of wisdom about volunteers? Any tips that you want to leave anybody?
Well, I think the unique thing about COVID time, and this is not just volunteer engagement related, but I think having this experience that we are all going through allows us to not only, like Niki said, be creative and have to pivot, but I think it allows us to try new things, and using COVID as kind of the excuse if something doesn't stick, right? We can throw a lot of different ideas up against the wall and try and not feel so guilty about trying those new things. And if they don't work, it's just really allowing us to, maybe expand our ideas and, try a new program that maybe we were hesitant to try, or think about how we engage a volunteer a little bit differently. And if it doesn't work, we always have that excuse of, it's COVID to fall back on. But like, if it does work, I mean, like, look at what this has provided us the opportunity to try and do. So I don't know, maybe it's rose-colored glasses. I'm not sure, but, trying to take the positive side of it too.
Love it.
And
Great advice.
I would jump in too and say so much of what we've just been talking about with volunteering is relationship building. And when you have volunteers that come and spend time with your organization, they become invested, and they may become donors, or they may become board members, or they may just somehow, some way even be a part of your marketing process and spread the word a little bit more about who you are and your mission. And I've, again, seen that from people who maybe even just come in and volunteer for a day, and they just get that experience firsthand. And if somehow, some way you can involve them and engage them, even remotely, even for a day, and help them get that experience and truly feel your mission, and truly just be honest with them about what you're dealing with during the pandemic. Don't try to keep it super rosy, because it's not. For so many nonprofits right now, it's a struggle. And I'd say just be honest with your volunteers about what you're going through, and share with them what your needs are. And I think, again, that's just going to strengthen that relationship and help you have more people behind your mission overall.
And James, you're at an organization where you did have to go through some tough times because of COVID. What's your piece of advice you want to leave with folks?
To try and be innovative in how you engage with the community and your volunteers. And also, what it's done is it's given us the ability, because so many people were working from home or working with their kids at home, and they had the ability to take some time and actually volunteer. And so to really engage with them and to share opportunities for them to be connected with your organization. I think that's one of the best things that we have seen out of COVID, is that now that people have more time, because they're not going to events, they're not having to stay late at work, they're able to now give some more of their time back to the community. So be innovative in how you give that time back, or how you utilize that time that they're giving back. So.
Well, I just wanted to thank you again so much for being part of this panel. Again, thanks to everyone else who's watching this. Chuck Rowe from Midwest Studies Group. Catch you next time.